Returning now to the record is author Ken Block. He also worked for the Donald Trump campaign in 2020 and 2021 to investigate those claims of voter fraud in that 2020 election, and then wrote that book, Disproven. We've had you here before. Thanks for coming back with us, Ken.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
What are the biggest claims you're seeing now? We've seen some ballot boxes burning in some states. We've seen some issues here. What are the biggest things you're seeing now that give you cause for alarm, or maybe give you PTSD from 4 years ago?
What I'm seeing so far are a lot of mistaken claims of voter fraud for the most part. There was a claim of more than 50 people in Pennsylvania all registered to vote at the same address, and it got a lot of play in conservative media. And it turns out that what the person had identified was a church where more than 50 Benedictine nuns were actually living and working and voting. So there was nothing nefarious there, and but there was an awful lot of noise about the fact that whoever was living there was committing voter fraud. They weren't, and apparently they're considering a defamation suit. Most of what's come up so far has been people not understanding what they're looking at, not understanding how elections works. Of course, when someone is firebombing a mail ballot box, that's a somewhat different situation. That happened in Portland, Oregon, which is probably one of the most blue places you can be in the country right now. So that crime, that election crime, was probably not someone on the left doing something wrong. That was probably someone on the right doing something wrong.
And time will tell. Of course, there is a swing race for Congress there. That particular incident may not have anything to any measurable impact on the presidential race, perhaps in a race for Congress. I don't know your prescription for local election officials there, what they might do in an instance like that. Do they have these contingencies built in, these protocols for worst case scenarios?
I don't know how you completely recover from that. You obviously have to publicize it, hope that the people who use that drop box come forward, identify themselves. Then that would allow election officials to determine whose ballots they received and whose they did not. And they can begin to try to piece together who needs to cast a new ballot.
Ken, one of the reasons I find your work and your book so fascinating is because you're at that cutting edge of a person's skepticism and their question, and then the fact, the discovery. What do you see? Do you see a trend where people have that aha moment where they go, oh, okay, well, now my question is answered? Or is it the other thing where it's on to the next fever-pitched race for some other explanation for why this can't possibly be true?
Yeah, it really depends on the person with whom I'm interacting. Some people are simply have a single aha that they think they had, and I'll help them try to understand whether it's correct or not. And then I never hear from them again. For others, it's thing after thing after thing after thing, which was what I had to deal with in 2020, directly after the election. And those folks aren't interested in right or wrong necessarily. They're just interested in trying to come up with the proof to back up the currently empty claim that voter fraud is everywhere and impacting the election.
So less learning, more out to prove a confirmation bias.
Correct.
How closely were you watching and reading the recent court filings and the unsealed information in Jack Smith's case that he's building against the former president? Part of the case he's building centers around this idea that the former president and his close allies and advisors were looking to people like you and had hard, concrete information from you and still took actions adverse to that information.
I'm keenly reading every line in those filings, and in his big release about a month ago, my company is identified in his filing as company C2, and the context of the mentions of my company were that my company was one of two that had been hired by the Trump campaign to look for evidence of voter fraud. Neither the other company nor mine was able to deliver any meaningful quantities of voter fraud that could have explained a change in the election result in any of the swing states. And they also, in that same filing, my company is identified, the work my company did is identified as being a key element in a false claim of voter fraud in the state of Nevada.
Have you been approached by anyone in the special counsel's office, the Department of Justice, the FBI, seeking information about your work?
So the FBI contacted me in, I think, January or March of 2023, served me a subpoena for Jack Smith's grand jury, and I had to turn over all of my companies and my communications with the Trump campaign about the work that I had done for them. So, yeah, in that context, yes, I have been in contact with Jack Smith's team, but since I turned over my information, I have not heard anything more.
Can you imagine a scenario in the future, should Jack Smith retain his role as special counsel, where you might be called as a witness?
It's possible. I mean, right now I'm what's called a fact witness. I've sworn to the truth behind all of my communications, and they have all those communications. So they shouldn't directly need me to testify, but it might make for interesting drama if I am brought in.
We're in that crunch time before the big election of 2024, when everyone's combing through polls, looking for nuggets, trying to deduce any hint in the tea leaves that might alleviate some anxiety and give us some sense of the future. I don't know if you have your crystal ball or Larry Sabato's crystal ball, but I have seen you make something of an analysis online. And it goes back to that cutting edge of persons who find facts and learn from it. You said people who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. What does that portend for the future of this election and outcome in your view?
In 2020, there's documented proof that what was behind Trump's loss was his loss of support from moderate Republicans. It cost him the election in Georgia and Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin for sure. Tony Fabrizio is Trump's pollster. In December of 2020, he published an analysis of a huge exit poll he conducted, and he determined what I just told you, was that it was the loss of moderate Republican support that explains Trump's loss in that election. Since November of 2020, President Trump has done very little to solve his support problem among moderate voters, regardless if they're moderate Democrats or Republicans or independents. His message has not been for them. His message has been extreme, even more extreme than it was in 2020. What you saw in the 2024 Republican primary was Nikki Haley running against Trump, getting a lot of moderate Republican support. And the amount of support she had should be very disconcerting to the Trump campaign. She got 150,000 votes in Pennsylvania, a state that Trump lost by 80,000 votes in 2020. And that was after Haley had dropped out of the race. She took 250,000 votes in North Carolina, 300,000 votes in Michigan, about 70,000 votes in Georgia. And in every case, the number of votes that I'm talking about is many times the number of votes that Trump lost by in 2020. Trump hasn't solved his moderate Republican problem. And when I refer to looking backwards at history, he does know that that's what caused his loss, because his pollster told him that. The fact that he hasn't solved it, I think, is very problematic for him. And if he does lose, I'm confident that this will be why he loses.
So there are enough Nikki Haley voters out there. You're saying that conventional wisdom would tell a conventional candidate, court those voters. Donald Trump is anything but a conventional candidate, and maybe he has a different definition for courting. I don't know.
That could be. I mean, he even has a challenge getting Nikki Haley to really aggressively support his candidacy at this point. He was beyond dismissive with her during the campaign. I believe he called her bird brain and other pretty harsh, judgmental nicknames for her. I could easily understand how she's not leaping up and down at the chance to help him at this point.
I wonder if we can take a moment to lean on your expertise as a data analyst, someone very familiar with election law, to look at some issues in Missouri. The Secretary of State's race, which is the official charge with overseeing the state's election administration. In Missouri, there are two candidates, a Republican and a Democrat. The Republican wants to throw out voting machines, switch to paper ballots, hand count only. Your advice?
You know how many voters are in Missouri, roughly?
There are more than a few million.
Yeah. So Maricopa County in Arizona, I did an analysis where if they tried to count those ballots by hand, There's about 1.5 million voters in Maricopa. Most of them vote. The ballot in Maricopa this year is going to have 70 different races, 70 different races on it. That's about 100 million different votes that would have to be tabulated by hand.
For all the
It
different
would
races
take
and candidates on the same
many
ballot. Yeah.
years. It would take many years to get through that. And there's no way that a human being is going to count those votes more accurately than a machine will. It's a terrible idea. It's going to introduce way more problems than it eliminates. And what any reasonable election official should be doing is conducting risk limiting audits, which is a mechanism in which you can determine with great certainty that the machines are doing the right thing. If Missouri isn't doing that, that's what I believe any candidate should advocate for doing at this point. Counting by hand is insanity and wrong and ridiculous.
And we do have local election officials who hold that position and who do conduct those risk audits of their machines that's transparent, open to the public. They're proud of their work. But while we still have you in this last bit here, on election night, as those nerves are building, viewers are watching KSDK here in Missouri and Illinois trying to get their results. What states and what systems in those states do you think could take a bit longer, and why?
Yeah, so right off the bat, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are going to take a long time. And the reason for that is their state laws dictate that election workers cannot begin processing mail ballots until Election Day. So that's why Pennsylvania is going to take most of the week after the election to tabulate the mail ballots. Same thing for Wisconsin. We will hear promptly, I believe, and by promptly, it may not be election night, but the day after. I think most of the other states will hear from promptly unless there are challenges. And we know that Arizona had challenges and Georgia had challenges, which extended the time to determine what the result is.
Nevada?
If there's recounts, and I'm sure there will be, it's going to be a week or longer before we know, which I know no one wants to hear me say, but I think that's the reality.
We got to set expectations. Where do you set those lines for Nevada?
It's going to be Harris in Nevada, similar to the margins that 2020 had.
All right, Ken Block, thank you. We'll be watching closely for more of your analysis as this race starts to unfold and the details come in. If there are any questions, of course, we can look to you and other data analysts to find the facts and not just wonder about some of these viral videos or images we might see that raise questions.
Right.
Ken, thanks for your time.
Thank you.